Hello, my friends, and welcome back. Super excited to have you on this episode where we're going to talk about to grade or not to grade and motivation and how they're connected because they are. So before I get going on that, I want to say something to you, mamas, that's been on my heart this week because I've had so many moms reach out with fear and anxiety. And so I want to address this right away. We, as those of us who pull our kids out of the public school system, who have not homeschooled forever, experience something a little bit different than traditional homeschoolers who have always homeschool experience. We tend to have a lot more fear. It tends to be a little bit more scary because, and I think part of that reason is because those who have always homeschooled, had it in their life plan, like this is what we're going to do from the time that their kids were pretty little, and sometimes in elementary school, that they go, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to set up our life. But for those of us that pull our kids, it's like a life earthquake, and it shakes everything else when we pull our kids out because it totally it messes with our brains a little bit because we're like, oh my gosh, my plan was to have them graduate from high school and then go to college. But now I'm homeschooling them. And so now I don't have free time anymore. And now I don't know what I'm doing. And what if they don't go to college? And what if they don't get into college? And what if, oh my gosh, and it becomes terrifying. So I want to say, I get you and I understand and I hear you. And if you're feeling that way, know that you're not alone and it will pass. And it takes several months to pass. So this week I've been in touch with somebody about to homeschool, somebody that literally pulled their child this week, and then somebody who's been homeschooling 2 months. And then there's some others that are thinking about homeschooling anyway. And I hear the same sentiment. I feel like I'm going to throw up. I'm so scared. But yet the other option has been so terrible. One mom I talked to literally pulled her daughter yesterday after months of mean bullying and the school not doing anything about it. And it was an elite charter school in her area. And her daughter's a freshman in high school and is darling and beautiful. And there's a lot of mean girls and there's a lot of jealousy. And she got bitten by 2 kids who identified as wolves. That didn't help matters either. And I wish I was kidding when I say that. Legitimately, that also happened. But the sentiment I heard from this mom was, this was not in our plans. Homeschooling was not in our plans. And now I'm scared to death. And what do I do? So if you're feeling that way, know that you're not alone. It's a very normal feeling for those of us that pull our kids from the system. It's totally normal. And if you have anxiety every single Monday where you're like, my kids aren't going to learn anything, I'm ruining them. Totally normal, right? You're okay and things will be okay. And I promise they're better off with you than they are in a system that is meant to destroy their spirits and their hearts and their minds and their souls and their creativity and their beauty and their joy. They are better off with you because you love them and you're their parent, and you will get through it. I told one mom who freaked out this week. She's been doing it for 2 months, pulled her kids a couple months ago, and she still has anxiety. And I said, listen, mama, I cried every day for almost a year. You'll get over it, I promise. The person who has the hardest time adjusting and having to go through the deschooling process is us as parents, because we went through a lot more school than they did, and that's what we know. And we're shifting our whole lives, and guess what? You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. It's scary to buck the system, but ultimately, when you get all the way through the ugly and the messiness, it's beautiful on the other side. I promise you're going to come out on top. And it might be in a couple of years you still get scared and afraid. But guess what? It's okay. And by the way, just remember your counterparts who have their kids in public school, it's no guarantee just because they get a diploma or even if their kids go to college, it doesn't mean that their lives are going to be hunky-dory. It doesn't. 60% of college graduates are either underemployed or unemployed right now. So there's that, so, and by the way, the rates of and the statistics for homeschooling kids getting into college is really high. So like we are told that no, if you homeschool, your kids will never go to college. It's a lie. It's a lie. But at this point, even if you don't want your kids to go to college, that works too, because there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in our education system, even in the university setting. I'd say especially in the university setting. So there's that. So I want you to know, relax, take a deep breath. You're going to be okay. And so will your kids. And expect that you're going to be going through the grieving process for a while. And it's okay. It's okay to be afraid. And that's where courage comes in. Courage is when you have fear and yet you do the right thing anyway, even afraid. So keep having the courage, mamas. It's going to be okay. So let's talk about motivation and grades and all of that stuff. Now, for those that are new to the podcast, I am what's called an eclectic unschooler, which is of all of the forms of homeschooling is probably considered the most radical, which is funny because that's not how I started. I started as a traditional homeschooler where I'm like, we're going to do school at home and we're going to get curriculums. I'm going to grade you. I'm going to give you tests. And then we, by the end of the year, moved towards unschooling, which is child-led learning. So I believe in child-led learning. However, it may not be for every family, and that's okay. I accept that. I don't judge you for it. Well, I might judge you a little bit, but not a lot. I won't judge you a lot for it. But I want to talk about grades because my son last year, my now 11-year-old, is a very fast runner. He's a very talented kid. He's a very fast runner. So we did a track, land sharks, like little track extracurricular activity for him because he wanted to compete and see how that was. Eventually, he's like, yeah, this is good. I don't want to compete in running anymore. He's very fast. So I was with a bunch of other mamas, and we were a homeschooling group competing against public schools. And the kids, of course, our kids did really, really well. But I was talking to the other moms and it became very clear. They're like, oh, our kids will sit there and they'll watch the kids walk home from school. And I'm like, we're not done with our schooling. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I said, so you do school at home? And they're like, yes, we do. And they looked at me funny when they're like, what kind of, what philosophy do you follow? And I said, we are eclectic unschoolers. And they're like, oh. And yet my now 16-year-old was standing next to me and he whispers in my ear and he's like, oh my gosh, Mom, I'm so grateful that you are my mama and those women are not, because I would poke my eyes out having to sit and do what I'm told all of the time. He said, now I see. I don't think I'd ever want that again. And I said, I agree, kiddo. I agree. So what does this have to do with motivation and grading and all that stuff? Well, we'll talk about that here in a second. There was a very funny clip, and because of copyright law, I can't show it, but I'll share the link in the description. I'll try to figure out how to do the link in YouTube as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm still working out the kinks of how does this all work? But on the show notes, if you're listening, I'll leave a link so you can watch it. It's a clip from the Cosby Show. And I know there's controversy around Bill Cosby, but as a kid, I loved the Cosby Show. I watched it every Thursday with Family Ties. And there's this part that has stuck with me all these years, even though I was a very young child watching the Cosby Show. I remember this scene so carefully. And in it, Denise brings her boyfriend home to meet her parents. And the boyfriend, Cosby asks, hey, well, what are you studying and who are you? And they start talking. And he said, oh, I actually don't agree with grades. I think they're arbitrary. And Cosby's like, what? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I would, he says something like, I would assume then you have bad grades. He's like, oh, on the contrary, I'm a straight A student. And he's like, really? Are you planning on going to college? He's like, well, I've been contacted by every major Ivy League. but I don't know if I'm going to go to college. I want to take a couple years off and figure out my life. But I think grades are arbitrary. I think that our education system is arbitrary. Like, it's really fascinating. And then Cosby makes a joke about, well, you figure out your life, and everyone laughs, ha ha ha. And Theo's like, the younger brother of Denise, is like, oh my gosh, I love you so much. I also hate grades. And Cosby's like, yeah, it's because you have bad grades. Right. Anyway, that's the scene. And that stuck with me because I think about that. I'm like, yeah, that's even over the years as a kid, I was like, yeah, why do we have grades? Why do we get graded on assignments? So as I'm preparing for this podcast, that scene came back into my mind, and I actually looked it up. So what is the purpose of grades? That's what I ask you. Well, we assume that grades are meant to be feedback, right? That we give a child a grade to show that they are where they are in the learning process. And it's meant to be feedback, right? I mean, ideally, isn't that what the purpose of a grade is? But yet, why does it seem so permanent? I believe that one of the reasons that we have a whole nation of people who are afraid to fail at anything, so they don't take a lot of risks anymore, is because grades are so set in stone. It doesn't show feedback of how a child is doing. It's a snapshot of what the child can regurgitate, not what they're actually learning. Grades have become the end goal as opposed to the means to the end to help a child with the learning process. And so now we have a whole nation of people who are afraid of failure because grades become absolute. Like, I know you've heard that before, like with, you better be careful, because I even said this to my older kids all the time. I'm like, you better get good grades because they go on your permanent record. They go on your permanent record. So realistically, grades are not meant there for feedback. As a matter of fact, John, I'm going to be pulling from a few resources, including the work of The Weapons of Mass Instruction, A School Teacher's Journey Through the Dark World of Compulsory Schooling by John Taylor Gatto. Now, those of you who are brand new to my podcast, John Taylor Gatto was a school teacher for 30 years in the New York City public school system. He taught the lowest income kids. He taught in the wealthiest schools and everything in between. His last couple years of teaching, he won New York City Teacher of the Year. Final year, he won New York State Teacher of the Year. Retires. Right after retires, I believe it's the Wall Street Journal, publishes an op-ed that he writes about how essentially the public school system destroys the hearts and the minds and creativity and all of the things for students. And then he spends the rest of his life, he just died a couple years back, spends the rest of his life trying to help parents leave the school system and convincing people that school reform is not possible, that the whole system needs to be chucked. Spends extensive years researching the history of our system, and then really wants to help families to leave the system. He's kind of become my hero. I wish he was still alive. But one of the things that he says in this book, the reason given for the enormous upheaval of family life and cultural traditions was, roughly speaking, threefold. And this is the point of compulsory schooling. Quote, to make good people, to make good citizens, and to make each person his or her personal best. But he contends later that that's not what's happening. And so this is what he says. Inglis breaks down the actual purpose of modern schooling to 6 basic functions, any one of which is enough to curl the hair of those innocent enough to believe the 3 traditional goals of education are listed earlier. Number 1, the adjustive or adaptive function. Schools are to establish fixed habits of reaction to authority. Okay, I'm going to keep going on. I'm skipping some paragraphs here. Number 2, the integrating function. This might as well be called the conformity function because its intention is to make children as alike as possible. People who conform are predictable, and this is of great use to those who wish to harness and manipulate a large labor force. Number 3, the diagnostic and directive function. School is meant to determine each student's proper social role. This is done by This is done by logging evidence mathematically and anecdotally on cumulative blah, 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 records, as in your permanent record. Okay, number 4, the differentiating function. Once their social role has been diagnosed, children are to be sorted by role and trained only so far as their destination in the social machine merits. And no, not one step further. So much for making kids their personal best. Number 5, the selective function, which we're going to talk about here in a second. And number 6, the okay, I'm going to have to. The propedeutic function, the societal system implied by these rules, will require an elite group of caretakers. It goes on. Let's go back to the selective function, number 5. Schools are meant to tag the unfit with poor grades, remedial placement, and other punishments, clearly enough that their peers will accept them as inferior and effectively bar them from the reproductive sweepstakes. That's what all those little humiliations from first grade onward were intended to do, to wash the dirt down the drain, unquote. Okay. That's the purpose of grades. It's meant to separate the kids, the dumb ones from the smart ones. Except the really smart ones are the ones who instinctively feel like they need to buck the system, like that they don't want to conform to the authority. Because when you think about it, that's what grading does. It shows that kids can conform to what they are told. Well, what do I mean by that? Let's talk about this for a second. My now 15-year-old daughter had an aha moment at the end of last year. As I mentioned in an earlier podcast, my 14 and 15-year-old started at community college last year, although this year they're like, we don't really want to go back. Great. And they had good teachers. It wasn't that their professors were terrible or they had a great time. They liked their teachers. They liked their classmates who were all different ages, including a couple that were my age, but my daughter made had this epiphany. It was in April. She was finishing her last final paper. It was for English Composition 2. I liked her teacher. She liked her teacher, her professor. But she said, I had this realization, Mom. If I do exactly what the teacher tells me to do, then I get a good grade. That's it. If I write exactly as she tells me to write, then I get a good grade. But it doesn't reflect that I actually know how to write. I just followed what she told me to do. And she's the one who judges. She's the one who gave the assignment. She's the one who decides my judgment. So I don't know if I actually learned anything except to do what I'm told. And I said, isn't that perceptive of you, my sweet little 15-year-old? Who she had just turned 15, I must say. But it's true. When children are little, they are told and taught that by each teacher, that's how they learn to conform. The teacher is the authority figure that says, this is what you will do, this is how you will do it, and then I will be the judge if you did it good enough. And so I look at some of these kids who buck the system, who are like, I don't want to do what I'm told. I don't care about this subject. I don't care if I get a good grade. I really just want to practice my guitar. I think about those kids and I think, yeah, it's not that they're dumb. They're not dumb. They're actually pretty smart because they feel this need to buck the system. But I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, but as the saying goes, A students work for B students and the C and F students are the ones who own the companies. And if you look, there's an awful lot of entrepreneurs that failed in school, but yet they're succeeding financially in life. And why? Because they didn't want to submit to authority by jumping through the hoops that the teachers expected of them. And I can't fault those kids. I really can't. Earlier today, I went on a walk with my husband. I walk every day. It's how I clear my mind. It's so good for my soul. Even when it's really cold, I'll go for a walk just because it means a lot to me. So as we're walking, we pass we live across the street from the school, from a K through 12 school. It's a school my kids used to go to. And there's 3 girls walking away from the school headed towards 7-Eleven. Can see exactly where they're going. And I stop, and they're teenagers, right? They're probably, I'm guessing 15, 16. And I stop them and I'm like, hey kids, can I ask you a question? And they're like, and I said, no, look, you're not in trouble. I know that they were worried because I look like a Karen. I know I'm a middle-aged woman. But I'm like, no, you're not in trouble. I'm not your truant officer. Right? I know that they were skipping class. I know when the lunch periods are because my kids went to that school and it's not lunch and it's not an off period. So I know these girls were skipping class and I wasn't going to be like, hey, good job, girls, keep skipping class. Right. Even though I thought that because I'm like, yeah, these people. And I asked these girls, the question that I asked that I talked about in the Passions Course, I said, girls, can I ask you a question? Is that okay? I know it's a little creepy because you don't know me at all, but I just have a question for you. What are you passionate about? And there was no hesitation with any of these girls. And 2 of them were like, we want to be artists, specifically tattoo artists. I'm like, okay, I don't have any tattoos. I don't agree with, like I'm not a big tattoo person. I don't have any, but I'm proud of them for having like a desire. Like they know what they want to do. There was no hesitation. 3rd girl, what do you want to be? She goes, I want to be a makeup artist. All 3 were hilarious because they're like, and we have our own YouTube channels and Instagram channels. I'm like, you do? That is awesome. That is awesome. So even though I may not agree with what they want to do, I'm very proud of them for knowing what they want to do and then pursuing it. And they're young. And I said, how do you feel about school? And they all just looked at me like, and I said, you can be honest with me. I'm not going to your school. I'm not going to tell your principal like what you said. They're like, I mean, and they just looked up and hem and hawed and said, it's okay if you hate school. It's okay. And they're like, yeah, this one girl's like, I just feel like it's a waste of time. I'm like, well, it is, I'm sure their parents are going to love me. They're like, this random lady stopped us on the street and asked what we're passionate about. Right. But I thought about those kids and I thought to myself, and I didn't ask them what their grades were, but I could almost promise they're skipping class. I could almost promise that they're probably failing. And yet they're proactive in starting their own YouTube channels and they're proactive in practicing. One girl said, I practice all the time. Like I've been practicing. Sometimes my parents will let me do little practice on them, but most of the time, like I've been practicing really hard because I really think I want to be really good at it. And so I look at these girls and I'm like, yeah, at least they know what I want. Because if I ask the A students, I know what the straight A students are going to tell me. Well, I'm going to go to college and I think I might want to be right. And they don't actually know what they want to be. They know what their parents want them to be, but they don't necessarily know what they want to be. So to grade or not to grade, let's talk about motivation for it a little bit. Grading kills creativity if it's used as the means to, if it's used as the end and not the means to the end. It kills it. I want to read to you. This is from Punished by Rewards, The Trouble with Gold Stars, Incentive Plans, A's, Praise, and Other Bribes by Alfie Kohn. This book, it says Alfie Kohn's landmark challenge to carrot and stick psychology, featuring updated reflections and research and in a new afterward. Okay. Grades are no different than sticks and carrots. What are sticks and carrots? If we think about training a horse, horses, if a horse does good, you're training a horse. If a horse does good, they get a carrot. If they don't do good, they get a stick on the backside or they get kicked. And I guess that's how horses train. I'm not a horse trainer, but the term is carrots and sticks. If you do good, you get a carrot. If you do poorly, you get a stick. In our society, we see it in the workplace, we see it in schools. Carrots and sticks are used as incentives to get an end result. And the thought is, if you give people carrots, they're going to do better, and if you give people sticks, then they're going to change their behavior. But what psychologists have found is that in the long run, carrots and sticks don't work. In the long term, great grades don't equal true learning. They don't. That's why they found in the workforce, I started reading these books back when I was in the workforce still, and was trying to think, like, how can we increase workers' productivity? And what's been found is, like, in the workforce, once a person has a certain amount of salary, if you give like big bonuses and incentives, it actually demotivates people. Like, the research is very counterintuitive, but it's very clear. The same thing happens, they find, with students. Okay, so this is what he says. Okay, he's in his book, by Alfie Kohn's book, there's a whole chapter on lures for learning, why behaviorism doesn't work in the classroom. So I want to quote a little bit about this. A little bit from this. Okay, so he says, chapter 8, when they first get to school, they are endlessly fascinated by the world. They are filled with delight by their newfound ability to print their own names in huge, shaky letters, to count everything in sight, to decode the signs they see around them. They sit on the floor at story time, eyes wide, jaws slack, listening rapidly as the teacher reads. They come home bubbling with new facts and new connections between facts. You know what we learned today, they say? By the time the last bell has rung, the spell has been broken. Their eyes have narrowed. They complain about homework. They count the minutes until the end of the period, the days left before the weekend, the weeks they must endure until vacation, the next vacation. Do we have to know this? They ask. And then he goes on. I'm going to skip a little bit. In any case, there is nothing natural about these changes. He's talking about changes in children from loving to learn to hating to learn. Okay. They cannot be written off as an archetypal loss of innocence, an inevitable developmental progression. Rather, if children's enthusiasm is smothered, it is, now listen carefully, it is a direct result of something that happens in our schools. My friends, they kill the love of learning. So he goes on to talk about the motivation to learn. Fact 1, quote, young children don't need to be rewarded to learn. The fact that children are not equally receptive to what the teacher is doing at any given moment should not distract us from the recognizing that the desire to learn itself is natural. And then he goes on to talk about that he reiterates from another specialist that children become demotivated to learn as time goes on. Okay. Fact number 2, quote, at any age, rewards are less effective than intrinsic motivation for promoting effective learning. So he goes on to talk about how when a child is interested in a subject, it stimulates the learning process for them. And then he goes on, for all our talk about motivation, I'm quoting, I think we often fail to recognize that a truth that is staring us in the face. If educators are able to create the conditions under which children can become engaged with academic tasks, the acquisition of intellectual skills will probably follow. We want students to become rigorous thinkers, accomplished readers and writers and problem solvers who can make connections and distinctions between ideas. But the most reliable guide to a process that is promoting these things is not grades or test scores. It is the student's level of interest. He goes on. Now consider the converse. Performing well. Oh, actually, I'm going to go back. Educators and parents ought to be focusing their attention on whether students read on their own and come home chattering about what they learned that day. It is theoretically possible for a child to be highly intrinsically motivated and still perform poorly. But the number of such students I warrant will never be great. He goes on, now consider the converse. Performing well, jumping through the hoops, doing all the homework, studying for the tests, making the grades, grooming the transcript, pleasing the adults, and hating every minute of it. This profile fits millions of children. They are learners, yes, but reluctant, other directed learners who have been trained to read everything that is assigned and nothing that is not assigned. They are in Montaigne's unsettling phrase, mules laden with books. More than 3 decades ago, Jerome Bruner described the results of this paint-by-number approach to achievement, focusing on the very successful students who are seekers after the right way to do it. Their capacity for transforming their learning into viable thought structures tends to be lower than that of children merely achieving at levels predicted by intelligent tests. They develop rote abilities and depend upon being able to give back what is expected rather than to make it into something that relates to the rest of their cognitive life. As Maimonides would say, their learning is not their own. Okay. This is what happens to our kids in the system, is they become subjective to the teachers, and they become followers, and they stop being able to think on their own. And you see it again and again. Okay. He goes on to raise the issue by implication, to inquire into the very purpose of an education, a disconcerting prospect perhaps for those whose objective is to turn out adequately skilled workers who can increase corporate profits, which is true. Like, we know that. I'm unquoting for a second. We know that. We know John D. Rockefeller was heavily involved in our education system because he wanted a nation that could work and not think. He even said it out loud. Okay, quoting again, if like John Nichols, we are put off by talk of investing in education, a phrase that seems to express a desire for skills that we will pay rather than a passion to make things of value. If, like Charles Silberman, we think schools should prepare people not just to earn a living, but to live a life, a creative, humane, and sensitive life, then children's attitudes towards learning are at least as important as how well they perform at any given task. Okay. And then he goes on, fact number 3. Rewards for learning undermine intrinsic motivation. He goes on to quote Carol Ames and Carol Dweck, 2 thought leaders on mindset. He says, all rewards have the same effect, one writer declares. They dilute the pure joy that comes from the success itself. Okay. Then he finally, this is my last quote by him, is he's quoting Richard Ryan and Jerome Stiller. The more we try to measure, control, and pressure learning from without, the more we obstruct the tendencies of students to be actively involved and participate in their own education. Not only does this result in a failure of students to absorb the cognitive agenda imparted by the educators, but it also creates deleterious consequences for the effective agendas of schools. That is, how students feel about learning. Externally imposed evaluations, goals, rewards, and pressures seem to create a style of teaching and learning that is antithetical to quality learning outcomes in school. That is, learning characterized by durability, depth, and integration. Okay. Oh, this last quote, because this is beautiful. Telling students exactly what they have to do or using extrinsic incentives to get them to do it often contributes to feelings of anxiety and even helplessness. Some children, instead of rebelling against coercion, simply relinquish their autonomy. And then he goes on to give us the studies to support his claims. And anyway, obviously he's very anti-grades. And he goes on to talk more about that. It's a very thick book. There's more about that. Okay, so what do we do, parents? Now, the good news for you and I is we don't have to change the education system for 51 million kids. We just have to change the education system for our own children. For me, that's the 4 remaining at home. At the beginning, when I very first started homeschooling, I gave my kids grades because that's what I knew to do. That's the only thing that I knew to do is, okay, now I have to grade them. But I've learned very quickly, and at the beginning, like my daughter's like, "Can I have a sticker? Can I have a star? Can I have a smiley face? Did I do good?" And she looked towards me, and it wasn't just her, but all my kids looked to me for validation, and they looked to me for, well, this is your grade and this is how you did. But by the end of the year, I'm like, how do I grade a child who is, reading 2 novels a week and discussing really beautiful concepts with me on her own? How do I grade a child who will spend hours doing one task and trying to get better at the task? I can't just slap a grade. Like, how do you do that? Um, I often hear moms on Facebook talk, especially like in non-homeschooling groups. In homeschooling groups, talk about like, I can't get my kids to do their work. How do you get your kids motivated to do something? And so I want to talk about that, like, because the school system uses grades for motivation. That's their extrinsic motivation. But how we get kids to learn at home, we have to employ intrinsic motivation. So let's talk about that. We want our kids to get into a state called flow. So what is flow? There's a book out called Flow. It's by Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It is a beautiful book. Flow essentially is that state that we get as human beings where we're so focused on a task that we lose track of time, because the enjoyment of the task and completing the task is so fulfilling. It's not quite necessarily a state of happiness, but it's a state of like, you're so into the task that you want to keep going and you lose track of time, and it becomes fulfilling and enjoyment and all these things. So his whole book is about going into a state of flow. But if we want to talk about that, and he talks heavily about motivation and autonomy. And so let's talk about like what motivates people. How do we get into the state of flow? Well, Dan Pink, who, if you are in the business world and have never heard of him, you might just live under a rock. Dan Pink is an author, writes business books about motivation and many other things. Brilliant mind, brilliant thought leader. Same with Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, thought leader, Alfie Kohn, thought leader. Dan Pink is also a thought leader on motivation and flow. This is what he says. This is what he says about carrots and sticks first. He says, in other words, rewards can perform a weird sort of behavioral alchemy. They can transform an interesting task into a drudge. They can turn play into work. Okay, but he argues that there's 2 kinds of motivation. There's extrinsic motivation, which is when we get rewards and punishments and things like that. But the more powerful kind of motivation is intrinsic motivation. And he argues that there's 3 things that make up or require intrinsic motivation. The first one of these things is autonomy. That people need autonomy and they yearn for autonomy. When you think about this, like a lot of times we dumb our kids down and we look at our kids and are like, they're not capable of this. But yet, as early as when they're little and 2 years old, they yearn for that autonomy. Have you ever heard a 2-year-old say, I can do this myself? You try to button their coat and they're like, I can do this myself, right? From an early age, we yearn for autonomy, that desire that we can do things on our own, that we are the masters of our own souls. I am the captain of my fate. I am the master of my soul, right? That beautiful line from Invictus, the poem, right? We want to be autonomous. Children and teenagers are no different. They want autonomy over the things that they learn. They want autonomy over their life. And the older that they get, the more they desire it of it. They desire the autonomy. It's interesting to see how many kids are leaving the house and they can't do basic tasks like cook. They can't do basic tasks like figure things out on their own, that they still rely on their parents. The schools beat autonomy out of those kids. As a homeschool parent, you can give them autonomy. You're not going to give them 100% autonomy, right? But you are going to give them a lot of autonomy. And then you are going to be their guide. And you're going to help them guide and direct that autonomy in a beautiful way. The second thing that people want intrinsically, they want mastery. They want to be able to master something. Listen to this. He says, in our offices and our classrooms, we have way too much compliance and way too little engagement. The former might get you through the day, but only the latter will get you through the night. People yearn to be able to master something, to become really good at it and master it because they want to master it. So my 11-year-old is obsessed with animation right now. I don't know if he'll do this the rest of his life. He thinks he will. He may or may not. He also likes really extreme skiing, which makes me a little bit scared. But he loves animation. And I've said this before, if you're new, welcome to my life. He'll spend hours animating. So yesterday, I asked him, I said, his name is Jacob. I said, Jacob, you put out your first animation within this last week. How do you feel like you did on it? Like, I didn't give him a grade on his animation. I didn't. But I said, how do you feel like you did on the animation? And he thought for a minute, and I wanted to just hear what his perspective was, what his thoughts were. And he said to me, I give myself probably on a scale of 1 to 10, a 6. I said, really? Why would you give yourself a 6? And he said, well, because I didn't really know what I was doing and I was just kind of guessing. And I did take that little class on Skillshare, but my animation's still pretty basic. And I feel like I will get better over time, but I'm not there yet, but I will get better. I said, you're probably right. I think you will get better. And he's like, yeah, the more that I do, the better I'm going to get. I said, yeah. And he's like, and I made my new storyboards and everything for my next one. And he's already started working on his next animation, right? And he is getting better. But what if I had been like, okay, Jacob, I give you a C on this animation? I feel like that would have killed his spirit. And he'd be like, yeah, then I'm not animating anymore. You deserve a C. I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to say, man, your animation sucked. No, I was like, it looks awesome. How do you think you did? He knew how he did. Students know how they do. I told my son, who is trying to do YouTube, my 16-year-old, which is funny because he gives me the rundown for his day. These are the things that I'm working on. These are my goals. This is what I'm doing. I don't have to tell him that. He knows what he needs to do. And one day, several months ago, I said to him, I saw the YouTube video you put out. I think it was terrible. Like, yes, I was that mom. I was like, this is my concern. And I feel like, I shared with him and he said to me, he's like, Mom, I love you. I do. But I have to be honest with you. You're not a YouTube expert. And you know who's going to tell me how well my YouTube is, like how well that particular video, how well I did it? I said, who's going to do it? And he goes, YouTube will let me know. If I do a good job, do the analytics right, do the thumbnail right, do everything correct, I will get views. I will get likes. I can look at the analytics. You don't have to tell me how I did because the market's going to tell me how I'm doing. And I was dumbfounded. And he's like, I don't mean any disrespect, Mama. But, and you don't have to grade me on it because YouTube is going to grade me on it. And I thought, and I paused. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's dead on. The reality is that he understands that a market will tell him he's doing a good job. If you get into real estate, you could have your broker owner telling you you're doing good all day and night. But the reality is, if you're selling houses, then you're doing well. If you're not, you're not. Naturally, in the world today, people are not giving out grades like they're candy. They're not. It doesn't exist. In the real world, we don't get grades. The real world tells us whether or not we're succeeding in something. But yet our kids are trained to go by grades. Okay. So the second thing is mastery. Like, we want to master something. My 11-year-old wants to master it. He ranked himself. He graded himself. I did not have to do that. I didn't have to do it for him. And intrinsically, he did it. And by the way, he was up at 6 a.m. this morning working on his frames. He has another goal for this week of what he wants to get done. I don't have to tell him to do it. He just does it. The third thing that we need, according to Dan Pink and Drive, for motivation, the third element of motivation is purpose. That the work that we do has purpose. As parents, we tend to push our purpose on our kids. Now, there are things that with my kids, this is why I'm an eclectic unschooler. There are things that are important for me to teach my children. And I'm like, kids, I know you don't care about learning this, but it's important for me as a mother to share these things because this is part of our family. This is part of what we believe. This is part of who we are. So you're going to learn these things, such as history. You're going to learn our history. You may not like it. You may not agree with things in history, but you're going to learn it. And you know why you're going to learn it? So that we don't repeat it, so that we can be better people. Okay. So my kids know there's certain things. I'm like, we will read scripture as a family. I will teach you about God because this is important as a family. Whether or not ultimately at the end of your life, you choose to believe our faith tradition is up to you. But while you're under my roof, you're going to learn these things. And then there's other things that really kids don't see the purpose in, right? So those are things that I'm like, okay, these are non-negotiables for our family. But most things, if my kids don't see a purpose in it, I don't push them. My 16-year-old refused to do algebra 2. Why? He told me, he said, Mom, I don't see purpose to it. If I was going to be an engineer, if I was going to go into the sciences, yeah, I'd need it. But that's not what I want to do. I don't see purpose. And yet as parents, we push our purposes on our kids when it's unnecessary. Again, there's times that that's important, times for part of our family culture, part of, like establishing a strong family bond. And then there's other times that our purposes are pushed on our kids when they shouldn't be. Kids have to feel a sense of purpose about the work that they're doing. My little 11-year-old feels purpose behind doing his little YouTube channel. He wants to be able to express himself, and he sees purpose in that. And that's important because of it. It was interesting. I was on a Facebook group, and it was a twice exceptional group. A twice exceptional child is a child who tests at least 2 grade levels above where they are. They're usually the really, really smart kids that you're like, oh my gosh, even in first grade, you're like, but they're a little odd, I have a couple twice exceptional kids. Anyway, this mom in this group posted an interesting thing. She said, I have my first grader. Right now in their classroom, they are learning to count by 2s. My first grader is really, really great at math, and he can already do multi-digit long division. And he told me today that he refuses to do any more of the homework or worksheets that his teacher gave me, which I don't believe in homework anyway. That's me, not her. And she said, I don't know what to do because he is refusing to do the worksheets. He will, however, do the worksheets I give him that are long division worksheets that I bought this book, and he loves looking at it. And what should I do? And I was so disgusted by this one comment. And it was this mom, well-intending, writes, kids need to learn to do things that they don't like to do. Make him do the worksheets. And I was like, seriously? As an adult, if we don't see purpose in our work, we quit our jobs and we go find something that has purpose and meaning. If I was told to dig a hole and then fill up the hole, I'd stop doing it because there's no purpose to it. But yet we do this to our kids. We'll go, I know you don't see purpose in this, but you will do it just because. So I wrote on the comments section, I said, I'm sorry. I'm right there with your first grader. Why should he waste his time doing a count by two worksheet that he sees no purpose in when he wants to spend his time doing something else? Yes, there will be times in our lives that we have to do tasks that we don't believe in or that we don't want to do, right? But if there's no purpose to it, as adults, we won't. We're like, no, there's not a purpose. I'm not doing it. We instinctively do that. Why are we forcing our kids? This little first grader at 6 years old recognized that there was no purpose to that homework but busy work. And I said, Mama, don't make him do it. Anyway, it was not a popular comment. Her son's still in public school. So Dan Pink says, yep, this is the third. That third thing is purpose. That there has to be purpose in the work. So you get those three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Children will go into a state of flow, and that intrinsic motivation kicks in for kids. And by golly, we cannot shortcut, what's the term? We don't want to shortchange our kids, my friends. They're not that much different than us. They're just smaller. Their brains are still developing, but they want the same things. They want autonomy. They want mastery. They want purpose behind what they're doing. That's why kids want to cook with us, because they see purpose in it, right? That's why you'll see some little kids who they'll play with the play kitchen, then they see mom cooking, and then they notice there's a difference, and they want to help with moms because they know it's real, It's interesting because I read Drive years ago, and I read it all the way through the end, and I never understood the last part because I didn't do it at the time. But he talks about grades, he talks about report cards, and he talks about, wouldn't it be better if children had say in their report cards? Wouldn't it be better? And so this is what he says. He goes, too many students walk through the schoolhouse door with one aim in mind: to get good grades. And all too often, the best way to reach this goal is to get with the program, avoid risks, and serve up the answers teachers want the way the teacher wants them. Good grades become a reward for compliance, but don't have much to do with learning. Meanwhile, students whose grades don't measure up often see themselves as failures and give up trying to learn. The type 1 approach, and his type 1 approach specifically is that type 1 people are fueled by intrinsic motivation. So just side note, type 1 approach is different. Report cards are not a potential prize, but a way to offer students useful feedback on their progress. And type 1 students understand that a great way to get feedback is to evaluate their own progress. And so he goes on to talk about, why don't we allow kids a voice in their grades, right? Just like my little Jacob, he knew. He's like, nah, that was a 6. The effort was a 10, but the actual execution was a 6 on his animation. Okay, so then he goes on. And he quotes. This is what I found interesting. At the very end, he talks about what are some other options. And my friends, one of the very last things that he talks about as far as grading and schooling and education goes is unschooling. And he says, I'll find it here. If I can find it. He says, here we go. I thought this was super fascinating. And the first time I read this, I knew nothing about homeschooling. Read this again, new perspective, new eyes. He said, take a class from the unschoolers. In the United States, the homeschooling movement has been growing at a remarkable pace over the last 20 years, and even more so since COVID. And the fastest growing segment of that movement is the unschoolers, families that don't use a formal curriculum and instead allow their children to explore and learn from what interests them. And so he goes on to talk about unschooling. So my friends, Do you grade or do you not grade? Well, frankly, that's up to you. You can. But if you do, my suggestion would be get your kids involved in that grade because they know, they feel, and you don't have to tell them because they intrinsically know that. Motivate them through intrinsic motivation. Allow them to study some of the things that they love to learn. Now, if you're worried because you have to put together a transcript for your high school, your high schooler, get them involved in their grading process. What do you think? What do you think you should do on this? I do use a math program for my kids because I have a child who is in algebra 2. That's my 11-year-old. Again, he's a super smart kid. Quiet, a little bit of an imp sometimes, but super smart and darling and sweet. And he was doing it and he got a 57 on one of the group battery of questions that were asked of him for the set of equations. And I said, what are you going to do? And he goes, well, I want to continue with mastery. So I'm going to redo them and figure out what I'm doing wrong until I can master it. And then I'll move on. And it's fascinating because this particular program doesn't necessarily give them a grade. Like it says, you got 97%. Do you want to keep going? Or do you want, or 57 or 30 or 100 or whatever? And it says, do you want to keep going? Or do you want to relearn that and then hit mastery? And it's been fascinating watching my daughter who hates math, who said, I want to take this algebra class so I can prove I can do it. And she will sit there and she's like, no, I will get mastery. I'm going to master this. If she were in the public school system, that wouldn't happen. They'd slap a grade on her and move on and she'd hate math and everything. But in this case, she's like, no, I'm going to get mastery. By the way, this is called math-3-based math as opposed to spiral-based math. And so she'll redo it. And same with my 11-year-old. He's like, no, I want to master it. And once I mastered it, then we can move on. And whatever grade they give themselves, that's up to them. Because I expect them to grade themselves on like, how hard did you try? Did you figure it out? Did you learn it? Did you not learn it? Again, my 11-year-old, he'd give himself a 6 on the execution, but by golly, he put his heart and soul into it, right? But I don't have to slap a grade on him because the motivation to do better is there. He felt the autonomy. He wants the mastery. He feels the purpose. So with that, if you have to give them a grade for the sake of a transcript, let them decide. Give them the power. They want the autonomy. Shoot, you want autonomy. With that, my dear, sweet mamas, go love on your kids. Go let them work on things that they love and care about. And keep loving on them. Let them be intrinsically motivated. And with that, I hope you have a great week. We'll talk next week.